Welcome to Punchline Talks Politics, the budget, sponsored by Infostar IT Solutions. I'm Mark Owen, and today my special guest is Max Wilkinson, he's the MP for Cheltenham. Welcome, Max, to Punchline Talks.
So have we, Mark. Lovely to see you.
Hey, look, that was a bit fiery, the budget, wasn't it? I know it's your very first one. So, what was it like in the chamber today, and what's your take on it? What's your first thoughts?
Well, on the fieriness, Mark, I mean, you know me. I'm not one for sort of shouting. I'm more of a polite listener. So the level of shouting and jeering, I always find a little bit uncomfortable when we are sitting in the Commons chamber. And today it was of a level that I've never heard before. Obviously, there was a lot of very excited Labour MPs and there were some Conservative MPs who wanted to make their point, which is all part of democracy. My general view is that we should listen politely, and that is what constituents would prefer when they are turning on the TV and seeing the news clips. However, tempers sometimes flare in these things, and also, underneath it all, what I know is when we leave the Commons chamber, most of those people are having chats with each other and having a bit of knockabout laughter as well. So it is a slightly different dynamic to that which appears in the chamber for most of the people most of the time. Obviously, the main thing that we were looking at today was what was going to happen because it's the government's first budget. The Lib Dems have been campaigning for a very long time on NHS and social care. So it won't surprise you to know that one of the things that I really was looking for was more investment in the NHS and lines from the government about how they might invest in social care to help fix the NHS. And any kind of hint at future cross-party talks. I think there is some positive stuff in there about investment in the NHS. The day-to-day investment in the NHS seems to be up significantly, which is a good thing. And of course, we must welcome that. And I will be looking for what impact that's going to have at Cheltenham General and Gloucestershire Royal, the two hospitals that mostly serve our county. But in terms of the social care, that seemed to be mostly absent from the discussion. And what we know is if we want to fix the NHS, we are going to have to fix social care. And the Liberal Democrat view is that we ought to be in a position as a country where we can match what's happening in Scotland. That being that social care is free at the point of delivery for those who need it, not based on the ability to pay. And if we can get to that, we'll be at a stage where people will be able to more easily get back into work because the NHS will be working better, waiting lists will fall. And also, this is fundamentally about how we treat one another as human beings. And when we are all in need, I think everyone expects that the state will pick up with a minimum level of service, particularly on those health concerns. So that was the bit around health. So some to be welcomed, but some causes for concern there. And I'm sure you're going to ask me next about some of the impacts on business and tax as well, where there is a much wider debate. And we can absolutely bet, because you and I have watched these budgets over a number of years, and I know your other guests will have been as well, over the coming days. We are going to learn an awful lot more about the entirety in terms of the impact on individuals' tax, but business tax too.
Oh, without a shadow of a doubt. I've got to say, I was impressed with the infrastructure of schools and the investment in schools having, Reddy's obviously working that side. I would have liked to have seen more on law and order. I welcome the clampdown on shoplifting. I think, and you and I talked about this before the elections actually as well. But yes, let's talk about the business tax because it is eye-watering for a lot of companies. I had just had a conversation with Alex McIntyre who couldn't really see my point of view that it is, it's a big tax for businesses.
Yeah, employers' national insurance contributions are going up by a significant chunk, and it's hard to look past the fact that this is going to have an impact on businesses' ability to employ as they might otherwise have done. However, with all of these things, we do need to recognise that this current government did inherit a really difficult position from the past government. That isn't to give them a free pass, of course. They've now got to get on with delivering, and they've spoken about making sure that they are not increasing taxes on what they describe as working people. Although as a liberal, I'm not keen on that kind of language, and it's a bit woolly. And what is a working person and what is not a working person has become an unhelpful talking point for this government. But when we're talking about businesses, the impact on anyone who has a job working in a business will be felt because if businesses have less money to invest as a result of the taxes that they are paying, there's definitely going to be a knock-on impact, and that is going to be a cause for concern. I would much rather that the government had focused its tax rises on the very biggest corporations, on the big banks, for example, who were given a fairly sizable tax cut under the last government. The Lib Dems would reverse that to raise more revenue. We think there is room for changes to capital gains tax, where you could have people who are paying smaller levels of taxation on lower capital gains, the sort of capital gains that you or I might make on a sale of a property or whatever, but much higher capital gains tax being paid by those who are making very large capital gains, and that's a much fairer way of doing it. We think that would be a fairer way of balancing the budget rather than doing things that might be of significant concern to small and medium-sized businesses. And I know Punchline, you're dealing with SMEs in our county and on the periphery on a day-to-day basis. So you'll be hearing a lot about this from your contacts in the industry over the coming weeks, I'm sure.
Without a shadow of a doubt. And also about the minimum wage. What's your take on that? We'd all like to increase salaries, but again, it's a cost, especially for employing younger people. Hair salons that might take on an 18-year-old and suddenly seeing their costs going up. Those costs are going to have to be passed on to the general consumer.
Well, the economic impacts of minimum wage have been discussed at considerable length in academic journals, haven't they? And when the minimum wage was first introduced all those years ago, when I still had a full head of hair, in fact, I was a child, there were lots of discussions about whether it would result in inflationary pressures or widespread unemployment. That didn't prove to be the case in the end, and actually, in general, minimum wage increases have been a good thing. The question is, what happens now at this juncture? When businesses are under quite acute pressure. It is, of course, a good thing that the minimum wage is going up in general. In terms of what we need to do to help those SMEs, though, there is obviously a concern now that because of the national insurance contributions changes, those two that are put together might have a really difficult impact for some. But as I said, over the coming days, we will find out what is the sum total of the entirety of the budget and what impact there will be on businesses and individuals. But broadly, the Liberal Democrats welcome an increase in the minimum wage. And of course, when we're talking about health and social care, one of the things that we've really wanted to push for over these past few years is a higher minimum wage for carers specifically, because that helps ensure that people who are hiring new carers are able to bring people into their business, and there are more people who are retained in that industry. But also, it helps those local authority providers as well to retain people, and that would be via direct subsidy, which would come from the government, funded by some of those tax changes that I was speaking about earlier on.
Now, obviously, the big infrastructure money that they're sloshing around there as well. How hopeful are you about Junction 10 with the road going the other way, obviously for the Golden Valley, but also there's talk of Junction 10A for Tewkesbury as well.
Well, given that the government has said that they're going to be investing more in infrastructure, I think we can be broadly hopeful that there will be some of that investment. It was obviously absent from the statement itself, although there were references to schools being fixed in Derbyshire, which I always find very strange when chancellors are talking about specific, fairly small but significant for those communities projects in places all around the country. Um, I tend to think that's a slightly strange way of doing a budget, but we are where we are. And what we didn't hear was any specific projects that were related to Gloucestershire. However, those motorway junction projects, I believe, are already in consultation. And once things get that far, you can have a general level of confidence that they would be that we're in a good position to see them delivered. Of course, from a Cheltenham perspective, what I'm interested in is what we're going to be seeing in terms of government investment in the Golden Valley development. The past government did make a lot of promises over a long period of time about the level of investment that it would be making directly in the Golden Valley project, and that amounted in the end to a direct investment of about £20 million under one of the levelling up funds. Of course, when the new government came into power and did their analysis of all of the spending that was not accounted for, that was then thrown into doubt. What I've heard is that because this is a shovel-ready project and it's going ahead, that the government might be able to view that more positively, and particularly because GCHQ is adjacent to the site. It definitely has a national resonance. So I've been having chats with ministers, and I'm hopeful that we'll be able to get a ministerial visit sometime soon to Cheltenham to link up those ministers who we need to have the ear of with local industry in terms of the cyber community and also those who are charged with delivering that development too. And that's where my focus is going to be in terms of that big infrastructure investment. Um, uh, but of course, we will have to see what happens in due course, and maybe there will be questions over the coming days about all of those levelling up projects that were not properly accounted for by the previous government, because I'm sure there are a number of MPs just like me who are wondering what's happening to those projects.
Now, I see, obviously, in your office there. Whereabouts are you based in Parliament? You've been an MP since June, July. I can't remember the date now. It seems so long ago, the election. You enjoyed it, Max?
It's a real privilege to have this job, and every single day I wake up in the knowledge that something interesting is going to happen, and I will meet interesting people. I'll get to take part in debates in Parliament to raise issues about Cheltenham. To make sure I'm speaking up for local health services, speaking up for the care of the environment that we need, speaking up for our cybersecurity industry. So I've really enjoyed it. My office here is on the sixth floor of 1 Parliament Street. So what I can tell you is I've got a really good view of the Palace of Westminster, but that does tell you that I'm far enough away from the Palace of Westminster to have a very good view of it. But I've had a really good few months, and if people check the Hansard record and also see what I've been doing in terms of the constituency engagements which I've made, which are now I think up to 80 or 81. I hope people will conclude that I've been fairly busy and I fulfilled my promise to hit the ground running.
Now, I've got to say, I've got to ask you because you've got two radiators at the back. There's your radiator brass. Can you spin your chair around, sir? You got a radiator on a radiator.
You know what? It is always so warm in London and in Parliament that I've never had cause to wonder whether the heating works or not. But in a couple of months' time, when it gets a little bit chillier, you and I can have that chat again, and I will tell you whether I need to use a double radiator.
Max, unfortunately, that's all we've got for time for today. Thanks for joining Punchline Talks. If you like the show, please like, share, subscribe. And I'd just like to thank our sponsors, Infostar IT Solution, as well. And that's all we've got time for now. I think that's it. Bye, Max.
Thanks, Mark. Bye bye.